to control your breathing as it goes in, as it comes out. Then you should also know to perform kumbhaka. That means you should know how to retain your breath inside, and you should also see that your breath is restrained outside and prevented from entering into your chest. That means you should be able to stop your respiration with air inside your chest and stop your respiration with air outside your chest. And eventually what do? Eventually in pranayam, you come to that stage where you come to a stage where there is keval kumbhaka. Automatically, without any specific endeavor, you should be able to stop breathing completely and remain in trance. That means you should learn to be able to stop your breathing completely. That's why you have yogis who can actually be buried underground for 8 days, 10 days without any oxygen, without any air, and they're able to put themselves into a trance. Why? Because they have mastered pranayam. So after you have mastered pranayam, that means you've been able to stop breathing altogether. When you've been able to give up the process of breathing, then you can go on to the next. And that is pratyahara. Pratyahara means that you should be able to now withdraw your senses within yourself. You should now, just like a tortoise withdraws his limbs from all sides within the shell, so also you should be able to withdraw your senses within you. And after you perform that, you come to dharana, where you are able to focus all your energy, able to focus and concentrate all your energy on remembering God. Then you can come to dhyan, which is meditation. And by the process of meditation, by fixing your eyes on a single point, in fact it has been said by yogis that God is situated at the tip of your nose. If you can focus your eyes and your mind on the tip of your nose and remain in that concentration, eventually you will discover the Paramatma or the Lord in the heart. You will attain Samadhi. So let us see the process once again. Can we have the slides again? That you have to practice strict celibacy. You have to strictly practice the principles which include non-stealing, non-hoarding. You have to be 100% truthful even if it is to your disadvantage. You also have to learn to be 100% pure, completely content no matter what happens to you. And when you have mastered yama and niyama, you have to master 84 lakh asanas. And after you have mastered 84 lakh asanas and prepared your body for meditation, then you can go on to pranayam, where you can control your breathing to the extent that you can stop breathing altogether. And when you have been successful in stopping your breathing altogether, then you can go on to the next stages. That is, you can go on to pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and finally you attain samadhi. In fact, when Arjuna hears the process of yoga as described by Krishna to Arjuna, Arjuna put his hands up. He says, I give up. This method is not for me. So don't feel too bad if you feel this method is not for you either. Because it is a method which was not even possible for Arjuna to do. You think Arjuna was an ordinary person? Arjuna was not an ordinary person. He was the absolute flower of Indian manhood. He was the most wonderful human being living in India at that time. He was a prince. He was the son of Indra. Indra is the king of the demigods, and Arjuna was the son of Indra. He was in fact a direct friend of Lord Krishna. So you can understand what a wonderful person Arjuna was. He was a prince. He was educated by wonderful gurus like Dronacharya and by so many other wonderful sages. He was tutored by them. And after being tutored like this young prince, who is the epitome of shining Indian manhood, when he is asked and described his path, what does he say? He says, Krishna, I give up. This path is not for me. Arjuna tells Krishna, he tells him, he says, Chanchala hi mana Krishna pramati balavad dridham tasyaham nigraham manye vayur iva suduskaram. He says, my dear Krishna, my mind is so restless, it is so turbulent, it's obstinate, that you try to control this mind by the system that you're describing is like trying to control the wind. So Arjuna, who is actually the most wonderful human being living at that time, he says, this method is not for me. Because my mind is so restless and turbulent and obstinate that you try to control this mind by this method is like trying to control the wind. But even if you should strive on this path, and after many lifetimes of striving on this path of Ashtanga Yoga, you should finally attain Samadhi. If you would finally attain the goal of this yogic process, what does Krishna say about the yogi at the end of the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita? At the end of the last of the sixth, in the last verse of the sixth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, he says, Yoginam api sarvesham mad gatenantaratmana shraddhavan bhajate yomam same yuktatmo mata. He says that of all yogis, of all perfected yogis, that yogi who has attained bhakti, that yogi who is united with me in transcendental loving faith, that yogi is the topmost yogi of all. So once again we come to the same conclusion, that just like karma yoga is performed for the purpose of developing bhakti or love of God, just like jnana eventually leads to the conclusion that Krishna is God and you have to develop love for Him, just like in the same way you have Ashtanga Yoga, which eventually leads to the conclusion that although you become a yogi, the topmost yogi is one who has developed bhakti, one who has developed love of God. That is the final conclusion. That if you want to develop love of God, you will have to eventually transcend all these goals and eventually reach the final conclusion. Therefore, in fact, sometimes people have compared the different yoga processes. People have compared the different yogic processes to different floors in a building. If you start climbing the stairs, the first story that you climb, you struggle on the path of karma yoga. You keep on working without knowing what you are working for. So as you keep on working without knowing what you are working for, these people who are deluded on the path of karma, eventually what happens, they start thinking, what the hell am I working for anyway? So they start reading, they start acquiring knowledge. And while they keep on acquiring knowledge, their mind gets purified. And by the process of purification of that mind, finally a stage is reached whereby with that pure mind they can now meditate. And then they can embark on the process of Ashtanga Yoga. So they progress on Ashtanga Yoga with a purified mind, and through meditation eventually what do they reach? They reach the conclusion that Krishna is God and that you should develop transcendental loving faith towards Him. So finally you travel through karma, jnana, ashtanga, and finally you develop bhakti. But there is yet another way. You don't have to climb all those stairs. You can go by elevator. You can go by the lift. And what is the lift? Bhakti yoga. You just get into the elevator and what happens? The elevator takes you straight up to bhakti. So bhakti yoga is the elevator that takes you straight up to bhakti. You don't have to go through all these processes one by one. There is no need for you to struggle through all these processes. You get into the lift and you're taken straight up to the top floor. Bhakti yoga takes you all the way up to bhakti without any difficulty whatsoever. It is the simplest way to achieve bhakti. Of course, it's not a lift that can be self-operated. You have to have somebody operating the lift. That person who's operating the lift is known as Guru. So just like you have to have a liftman or an elevator serviceman who takes you up in the elevator, so also you must have a realized spiritual master who takes you in the elevator of Bhakti Yoga right up to the top until you have attained Bhakti. So what is Bhakti Yoga? What is Bhakti? Bhakti means love of God. What is the definition of Bhakti? Ananyas mamta vishnor mamta prema sangata bhakti richi uchyate bhishma prallada narada uddhava. This is the definition of bhakti. The definition of bhakti is one who has acquired unalloyed love of God. Which God? Vishnu. That means not the demigod. The demigod is not considered to be bhakti. Bhakti means love of Vishnu, of God, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Ananyas mamta vishnor mamta prema sangata. Not only is that love unalloyed, but it is actually love with a sense of intimacy. Mamta prema sangata. There is intimacy with God. It's unalloyed love of God with intimacy. This is called as bhakti by Bhishma, Prahlad, Narada, Uddhava. These are all the Mahajans who have attained love of God. So this is the definition given by all of them. So when you have attained unalloyed love for that one person God, and that love for God is accompanied by a sense of intimacy, that is termed as bhakti. Now what is bhakti yoga? Bhakti yoga is the means by which you attain that intimacy. Now when one has attained bhakti, what is his characteristics? He is always talking about God, he is always thinking about God. Whatever he does for God. Everything that he is doing for God. Everything that he is thinking about God. He is actually lost in an ocean of God consciousness. He is in perpetual constant ecstasy. Occasionally this can be manifest when you see tears rolling down his eyes, you can see his hair standing on end. He is constantly in a charged state of love of God, who is all around him, who is all within him. This is the state of one who has attained bhakti. So he is always visiting the temple of the Lord, he is always offering obeisances to God, he is always chanting his name, he is always glorifying him. These are the activities of one who has attained bhakti. Satatam kirtayanto mam yatantasya dridvrata namasyantastu mam bhaktya nitya yukta upasate. Satatam kirtayanto mam is always talking about God. And in this way, always talking about God, always offering obeisances to God, always chanting his glories, he is always engaged in worshipping God. This is called bhakti. This is the activities of a person in bhakti. What is bhakti yoga? Bhakti yoga means people who have not attained bhakti. They don't know, or they are not 100% realized about God. They are not 100% convinced about God. But they follow the activities of one who has attained bhakti imitatively. Imitatively. Although they have not acquired love of God, they imitate the activities of one who has acquired love of God. And by imitating the activities of one who has acquired love of God, they actually develop that love of God. Just try to understand. When the father is shaving his beard, he takes the shaving brush, he puts on the shaving cream, and he rubs his face until he gets a nice lather. And then he takes his razor and he starts shaving. The child who is seeing the father doing that, he also wants to do the same thing. He also wants a shaving brush. He also wants a razor. So what does the father do? He takes out the razor blade of the safety razor. He gives him a safety razor without the blade. He gives him the brush and he tells him, okay, you can shave yourself. So the little boy, he lathers his face up. He takes that safety razor without the blade and he removes all the cream from his face. And he thinks that he is shaving. And eventually a time will come when this little child, he will have a beard of his own. And when he has a beard of his own, then he can put the blade in and then he will understand what it means to shave. So also, Bhakti Yoga means following your spiritual father, following a person who has attained love of God and imitating his activities according to his instructions. So a spiritual master is one who has attained love of God, and having attained love of God, he instructs you like a little child that, see, this is what I am doing, you also do that. And by imitating me, a stage will come and you will actually experience and understand what I am doing. So bhakti means having love of God. And since we do not have love of God, we imitate the activities of a person who has love of God under his instructions and under his directions. We eventually, by following his activities and imitating them perfectly, gradually we develop the same emotions, we develop the same feelings, we develop the same transcendental loving feeling towards God. That is the path of Bhakti Yoga. So Bhakti is the goal, Bhakti Yoga is the means. Bhakti is the real thing, Bhakti Yoga is imitative practice, therefore it is known as Sadhana Bhakti. Sadhana Bhakti means what? Sadhana means that you are given certain rules and regulations. The spiritual master who has attained love of God tells you that now follow these rules and regulations. And by following these rules and regulations, get up in the morning at this time, chant God's name at this time, worship God in the temple in this way, perform this service to God, read these scriptures of God, read his message in the Bhagavad Gita, read about his activities in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And in this way, by constantly telling you what you should be doing, you follow it according to regulative principles. You follow it as a discipline. Sometimes people say, oh, why should I chant God's name and count it? I have passed that stage of counting God's name. If you have passed that stage of counting God's name, then you are a God-realized soul. Then in fact, we should become your disciples. But all those who have not attained love of God, who have not attained perfection, they have to follow a discipline. And that discipline must be followed under the instructions of a God-realized spiritual master. And by disciplining our mind according to his instructions, eventually we will attain the fruit which he has, that is love of God. So in short, Bhakti Yoga, the means is of discipline that must be followed. These are activities, whereas Bhakti is a state, Bhakti Yoga are activities. So Bhakti is a state where all activities come naturally with love. Bhakti Yoga are activities done under regulative principles. So in fact, there are 9 activities in Bhakti Yoga. In Bhakti Yoga, there are 9 activities that we perform. And these activities were explained by none other than Prahlad Maharaj. So Prahlad Maharaj was asked by his father, why are you worshipping God? Why are you worshipping Vishnu? He is my greatest enemy. So Prahlad explains to him, my dear father, there is no enemy in the world except your own mind. There is no enemy in the whole world except your own mind. And if you have conquered your mind, you have conquered all enemies. Because when you have conquered your mind, there is no enemy in the world. You will realize perfection. So Prahlad Maharaj explains to his father. He says, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakhyam, Atma Nivedanam, Iti Pumsar Pita Vishnur, Bhaktischen Navalakshana, Kriyate Bhagavati Adda, Tan Manye Adhitam Uttamam. That these 9 processes are the most wonderful activities that anyone can perform. These are the topmost activities that any human being can perform because they lead to perfection. So in fact, hearing about God is termed as Shravanam. What you are hearing today, you are hearing about the glories of God. This is Shravanam. This is a process of Bhakti. This is a process of Bhakti Yoga. Kirtanam, that is also a process of Bhakti Yoga. When you chant the holy name or when I talk about God, this is also a process of Bhakti Yoga. So Shravanam is one process, Kirtanam is one process, Smaranam, that is remembering God, thinking of God constantly, is Smaranam, that is also a process. Pad Sevanam, that is worshipping at the lotus feet of God. If you can't worship at the lotus feet of God directly, worship at the lotus feet of your spiritual master, that is Pad Sevanam. Archanam, that is worshipping the Lord in his incarnation as a deity in the temple, that is termed as Archanam. That when you establish a murti and that murti you worship it as God, as an incarnation of God, then that is termed as a process of Archanam. Vandanam means reciting notable prayers to God. When you recite notable prayers to God, this is known as Vandanam. Dasyam means working as a servant of God. Sakhyam means considering yourself to be a friend of God and working in that spirit. And Atma Nivedanam means surrendering everything to God. So these are some of the processes which you should perform in Bhakti Yoga. In fact, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was asked that of all these 9 processes, which is the topmost process? So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu answered. He said, Harer Nam, Harer Nam, Harer Nam eva kevalam. Kalau nasti, eva nasti, eva nasti, eva gatir anyatha. He said, there is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way. Except by chanting the holy name, chanting the holy name, chanting the holy name. That means of all the processes, chanting the holy name of God is the most powerful and most potent process for developing bhakti. So of all the processes in Bhakti Yoga, chanting the holy name of God is the most potent process for this age. In Kali Yuga, it is the most potent process for this age. Can you have the next slide? Of course, little later I will show you a slideshow on the 9 processes so that you can understand them better. That's why I am going over them a little fast. Now, among these processes, can you raise the slide a little bit? There is a 5th. Right, fine. Okay. A little lower. Now, there are 5 activities which are particularly powerful. These 5 activities are particularly powerful and potent in helping you to develop bhakti. And these 5 activities, if you acquire attachment to even one of these activities seriously, then you are well on your way to attaining bhakti. And these 5 activities should be performed under directions of a spiritual master. First and foremost, chanting the holy name. As I pointed out again and again and again and again, there is no substitute for chanting the holy name of God. Harer Nam eva kevalam, kalau nasti eva nasti eva nasti eva gatiranyatha. There is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way other than by chanting the holy name, chanting the holy name, chanting the holy name. Chanting the holy name is performed as a discipline to discipline your mind. You must count what you are chanting. You have to count what you are chanting because, as I said, you have no enemy in the world but your mind. Your own mind is your enemy. Your mind will convince you that you are most elevated, that you don't need to count. Your mind will convince you that you are chanting all day, therefore you are chanting more than Haridas Thakur, who chanted 300,000 names of God every day. But when you start counting, you will realize that you are hardly chanting one round. There was one person who was attending a course. He said, I don't need to chant God's name. I am chanting all the time. I said, just for my sake, take this counter home, borrow it. Take it and tell me tomorrow how much you chanted. He said, I chanted 104 times and I thought I was chanting all the time. So you did not even finish one mala, but he thought he was chanting all the time. That is how the mind deceives you. Therefore, it is very important to understand that your mind is your greatest enemy, and to discipline that mind, you must count what you are chanting. You must discipline your mind to chant a certain minimum every day. So chanting is very important. Worshipping the deity of the Lord. It is by worship of the deity of the Lord that you can make great progress. Actually, the deity of the Lord is not an idol. Actually, I have a separate lecture on deity worship, which is not included in this course, but perhaps we'll cover it one of these Thursdays. So the incarnation of God in the form of Murti is termed as a deity. And by worshipping that Murti of the Lord, we are able to fix our minds in the form of God. And by fixing our minds in the form of God and performing seva to that Murti, by performing service to that Murti, we actually progress towards developing love of God. This is the second most important process. You have study of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It is necessary to read the Srimad Bhagavatam if you want to acquire bhakti, because the Srimad Bhagavatam has been designed for the specific purpose of creating bhakti in your heart. It has been said in the Srimad Bhagavatam itself that Nashta Prayeshva Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatya Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. That by reading the Srimad Bhagavatam every day and by serving the pure devotee of God, love of God is established in your heart as an irrevocable fact. So reading of the Srimad Bhagavatam actually helps to develop love in your heart. And this process must be performed every day. Daily you must study the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is the instruction of authorities on Bhakti Yoga. In fact, it has been said that a home where Srimad Bhagavatam is, that is considered to be a place of pilgrimage. And a home, no matter how pious and holy and no matter how saintly its occupants, if Srimad Bhagavatam is not found there, you can understand that there is something lacking in that house. That means bhakti is lacking in that house. Because it is by reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, by hearing about the pastimes, the glories of God and His incarnations, that actually we develop love of God. Then we have living in a holy dham. Of course, if you live in a holy dham, nothing like it. Because if you've tried living in Ayodhya, or you've tried living in Chitrakoot, or you've tried living in Vrindavan, or you've tried living in Mayapur, or you've tried living in Nathdwara, or any of these dhams, you will understand what I mean. Because when you are living in a holy dham, you cannot help but be reminded of God. When people meet you on the road, they'll say Jai Shri Krishna. Or in Vrindavan, they'll say Jai Radhe. Or if you go to Ayodhya, they will chant Ram's name. So in this way, whoever meets you will be chanting God's name. You are always reminded of God. There is a temple of God at practically every doorstep. In Vrindavan, which is such a small place, there are 5,000 temples of God. Vrindavan, which is such a small place, there are 5,000 temples of Krishna. Because practically every little household is made into a temple. If you walk on the streets, you will find that people who are driving sheep, they have got a tilak on their forehead. Their one hand is carrying beads in a bead bag, and the other hand is carrying a stick to drive the cattle before them. So they drive the cattle with one stick, in one hand they keep beads, and on their forehead there is the mark of Vishnu. So everybody is steeped in God consciousness in a dham. So when everybody is steeped in God consciousness in a dham, it is not natural that you cannot help but remember God. Just like if you go to a city where everybody is caught up with the rat race, like Bombay city, it's very easy to forget God. But if you go to a holy dham, it's very easy to remember God, because wherever you turn, you see God. Wherever you speak to somebody, you are reminded about God. So living in a holy dham is a very important process. Now, of course, you might say that I can't go to a holy dham. All right, you can't go to a holy dham, neither can I. But what we can do is we can make our home into a holy dham. Make your home into a dham. You worship the deity of the Lord. You read the Srimad Bhagavatam. You chant the name of God. Not only you, but your wife, your children, or your husband, your children. You offer the food that you eat to God. You have pictures of God around you. You have books of God around you. You have tapestries with the glories of God on all of them. So wherever you go, wherever you look, you can't help remembering God. That is what your home should be like. So whenever you go home, wherever you turn, you will see God. You get up in the morning, you will see a painting of God. Wherever you go, you should be reminded of God. That is the nature of the dham. And you can replicate that dham in your own home. In fact, it has been said by Veer Raghav Acharya, one of the great spiritual masters in our disciplic succession, that visiting places of pilgrimage is a bewilderment of the mind, because actually you should try to see God wherever you are. What is the use of running away to see God somewhere? You should learn to see God wherever you are. So even in your own home, you should be able to replicate a dham. You should be able to make your home into a dham itself. In fact, not only should you be able to make your home a dham, but wherever you step, that place should become a dham. In the Mahabharata, it has been stated, Yudhishthira is speaking to Vidura. And what does he speak to Vidura? He tells him, Bhavad Vidha Bhagavatas, Tirtha Bhuta Swayam Prabho, Tirthi Kurvanti Tirthani, Swa Antastena Gadabrita. He says, my dear Vidur, what is the need for you to visit places of pilgrimage? You yourself are such a great devotee of the Lord that wherever you plant your feet, that place becomes a place of pilgrimage. Because since you carry God in your heart and you are so transparent that people who look at you can see directly through you and can be reminded of God. Therefore, you yourself are the creator of places of pilgrimage. That is the nature of a pure devotee. A pure devotee becomes the creator of places of pilgrimage. He doesn't need to go to places of pilgrimage. That is what you should aspire for. One who is not ambitious, he aspires to go to a dham all the time. But one who is ambitious spiritually, you must be ambitious spiritually. If you want to achieve love of God, you require to be ambitious spiritually. And be ambitious spiritually and desire create a dham wherever you go. So that when people see you, they must remember God. That is the nature of the devotee. He needs to purify himself to that extent that wherever he steps, that becomes a dham. My spiritual master, Kirtananand Swami Bhaktipad, he was told that you create a place of pilgrimage in America. Because America has no place of pilgrimage where people will remember God when they go there. You create that place of pilgrimage. But creating that place of pilgrimage doesn't mean materially creating a place of pilgrimage. It doesn't mean materially building temples or materially building buildings or constructing deities. Creating a place of pilgrimage means purifying yourself to that extent that everywhere around you people cannot help remembering God. So today if you go to New Vrindavan is a place which is a dham created by Srila Bhaktipad. That because of his purity, because of his spiritual potency, a place of pilgrimage has developed around him. That is what you should aspire for. In your own homes, you make your own home a place of pilgrimage. So when your friends, when your relatives, when your neighbors, they come into the house, they cannot help remembering God. So your home itself must become a holy dham. That is what you should be doing. And that will help you develop love of God. Then you have another very, very important principle. Associating with devotees of the Lord. There is no substitute for this whatsoever. There is absolutely no substitute for associating with devotees of the Lord. Because your mind is like a chameleon. I must have shown you this in the slideshow earlier. What is a chameleon? The chameleon is a lizard that changes its color according to its surroundings. Therefore, if it's placed on a red surface, it will take on a red color. If it's placed on a black surface, it will take on a black color. If you put it on a white background, it will become white in color. It will blend with the surroundings. That is the nature of your mind. Your mind, which is your worst enemy, is also a chameleon. It takes on the color of the surroundings. And if you keep the company of people who are on the path to hell, you will accompany them. There is no doubt about that. I have seen so many times, anybody who's been to college will have seen this, that you go to a college hostel, you find boys coming from Mofussil areas and small towns. They're very clean and pure at heart. They've never seen the big city. But when they come to the big city, in a short time, what happens?